What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. We all loved Pokémon for the various cute and cool creatures that inhabit this special world. However, design alone couldn't get people to adore the property without solid gameplay to back it up. And Pokémon has had an easy and rewarding formula for fans to enjoy from the very beginning. However, sometimes they do add or take away certain aspects of what we would expect, and while that does occasionally work out for the best, sometimes the amenities get a little crowded out, and what would be a defining feature in one generation just gets relegated to the background for once, and is sometimes never seen again. So let's look at which Pokémon features really should have been a much bigger deal when they premiered, but have faded into obscurity. Like one that I had all but forgotten, attack combos. Back in Gen 5, we saw the starters get new exclusive pledge moves, and instead of just more super powerful blows, this time the more moderate attacks had the unique functionality of crossing over with the other types. If Grass Pledge and Water Pledge overlap, then they create a swamp on the field to slow down opponents. Whereas if Fire clashes with the Grass, it'll create an Inferno to damage foes every turn. And then Water Pledge douses the Fire and evaporates it into Rain that makes it more likely for secondary effects to activate, like say flinching or poisoning. And frankly, this is a brilliant idea. Sure, there are some other Pokémon moves that interact, but that's always a setup of some kind. Rain Dance and then Thunder, or Defense Curl and then Rollout, isn't nearly the same as separate damaging attacks. It would be amazing if you could have both of your Pokémon do damage to the opposing side, and then stack additional bonuses on top of it. Like maybe you used a Rock Slide and then a Brick Break, and that creates the splinters like in Legends Arceus that cause residual damage each turn. That would open up a whole new realm of strategy where you might pick a weaker attack just to get those combination buffs. And what's extra fascinating to me is the possibility that you might even go for a not very effective attack that's worse in the short term, but has long-term benefits to help you throughout the battle. The only other attacks to interact at all seem to be the fusion moves of Zekrom and Reshiram, but that's really only when they're used against each other. So clearly this is a Gen 5 exclusive idea, but it's like they tried to hide it and were ashamed by putting it on only the starters and legendaries. But this is a great idea, and honestly it could have been the main selling point of the whole game instead of triple battles or whatever, and I think attack combinations would be adored by the fans if they were just easier to use and understand by placing such attacks on a lot more of the common Pokémon. That way you could experiment with ground and flying combos reducing everyone's accuracy, or normal and ghost attacks resulting in a possession gone wrong that prevents the foes from switching out or something else. Really anything else. There are dozens of possible combinations with different effects that you could try. But aside from keeping the pledge moves around for newer starters, they've totally forgotten they ever introduced this mechanic. And unlike multi-type attacks such as Flying Press, not even the fans seem to remember that this was ever in the game at all, which is a huge shame because there is a lot of potential here. There are some other things that get more attention as time goes on, like giant Pokémon. Obviously they did this with Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing, it was a pretty big deal in Gen 8, but it's been a pretty consistent trend with the Totems in the Alola region, Noble or Alpha Pokémon in Hisui, and even Titan Pokémon in Paldea. And you can even transfer up some of those bigger Pokémon to the current games, so they can embrace new concepts when they want to, they just lack the willpower to include these things, like hidden areas. You can always wander around and find small tucked away locations that most other players wouldn't stumble across unless specifically looking for them, but I'm not talking about the simple act of exploration. I mean the places that are secretive because they're not always there. Take Mirage Island for instance. This is a small out-of-the-way location that's found on Route 130 while surfing, but only sometimes. The rest of the time, the route is as plain as any other, which is a brilliant idea. It appears once a randomly generated number happens to match some of the digits in the personality values of one or more of the Pokémon in your party. Apparently, that makes it even rarer than a wild shiny Pokémon appearing. And what's even funnier is once you arrive on this mysterious island, you literally only find Wynots and a singular berry that can't be found anywhere else in the game. That means there's gotta be something special about this island, but we never really fully understand its eccentricities. But that's okay because the discovery is so enjoyable. We likewise see Mirage spots all throughout Hoenn while soaring in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which change every day, and they also have secrets based on which Pokémon are in your party. But Hoenn isn't the only region where this happens. Unova also had hidden grottos, where a similar thing happens on certain routes, where after walking around enough there is a chance that certain routes will gain a secret area that can house unique items and Pokémon, some of them being pretty rare. And it can be really hard to even notice them in some spots, because they just cram them in anywhere they'll fit. So you've got to keep an eye on every nook and cranny. Not that normal exploration isn't fun, but nowadays you just find a little hole inside of a rock that may or may not have a simple item in it, but then it's not a secret anymore, it's just there. It's a lot more gratifying to stumble across something that most anyone else wouldn't be able to find, and then they call you a liar because it's not in their version, making you second guess yourself only to go back on your own game to see that it's not there either. But you still have the Pokémon or items that you found there, so it couldn't have been a dream, right? It's uncertainties like these that make the Pokémon world feel magical and elevate your imagination to wonder what might be around the next corner. I just wish the modern games could do that too. I mean, can you picture what you would do if a special floating island suddenly appeared in the sky that had never been there before? However, I think undoubtedly the biggest letdown in backing off of Pokémon mechanics has got to be with inverse battles. It's easy to forget that this was ever included in a game before, because unlike Sky battles or Horde battles that are dotted all throughout your journey in Kalos, inverse battles were locked in a single spot in the entire game and could only be done once per day. So I wouldn't be surprised if people thought it was a one-time ever thing when they deny you a follow-up battle and then you easily forget where the building even was in the first place. But the idea of battling with an inverted type chart is astounding. Having Fairy be super effective against Poison or Fighting super effective against Ghost? It's fairly intuitive when you think about it, but then you see Seismitoad switching in so you instinctively pick a grass type, only to have it be weak to water this time around and get KO'd. Now, for some reason in this setup there's only the standard good or bad against, no immunities or quad weaknesses or anything, so maybe it would be a bit more interesting to fine-tune the matchups a bit, but it's still just cool that Steel is suddenly a super weak typing, whereas Ice of all things becomes a pretty successful wall. Honestly, inverse battles easily could have been the gimmick for an entire generation, but sadly they didn't think of the idea until the same game as Mega Evolution. So obviously that was going to draw the most attention, but even then they treated inverse battles as a third-tier option by having Horde battles available on just about every route, and numerous Sky battles to make sure that you don't forget that it's there. However, they did their best to obscure that inverse battles were an offering at all. Maybe they thought that it would be too complicated for young kids to grasp two different versions of the type chart at the same time, but just imagine if there were a move like Trick Room, but instead of flipping everyone's speed stat, it inverted the type effectiveness. That would be a great way to make sure that your favorite Pokémon is useful in every situation. Of course, they would have to make things extra clear that it just happened, otherwise you could just mash through the text and miss it. Maybe they could invert the background colors to match that happening. That way you would have a visual cue of said inversion occurring. Or I guess in more modern titles they just tell you the effectiveness of your attacks anyway, so those would all flip as well. The point is, this is a simple addition to the games that has been completely abandoned, but could absolutely be the cornerstone of an entire generation as a less intrusive battle gimmick. Maybe I'm wrong on that one, and the competitive players are screaming about how inverting the type chart for 5 turns or so would destroy the fundamentals of the game, but at the very least, could we please have it as more than just 2 spots in the entire franchise, so that it's not stuck in Gen 6 forever? I mean, I would even take a spin-off game devoted to it at this point, because it is far too great of an idea to never return to inverse battles throughout the rest of the Pokémon series. And it's one of the features that I desperately do not want to fade into obscurity. Although Legend ZA is coming, so since Kalos gave us the inverse battles the first time, maybe it'll make a surprise return here? One can hope. But of course, there are other features that have waned over time, like how breakable terrain in Pokémon battles was a really cool idea, or the fact that we used to have seasons, but none of the modern games are capable of doing that somehow. But as slowly as Pokémon seems to change, there is still always the hope that such simple but clever mechanics can make a triumphant return. Which odd or forgotten Pokémon features would you most like to see emphasized? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.